the RBI does step in to manage prices. I mean, Operation Twist, LTRO is not even government bond. It's almost managing yields on the corporate end as well. What did you think of those two steps?
I think these are steps that are partly inspired by central banks of other countries who have gone down this path. Of course, there is great amount of experimentation that's happening on monetary policy right now. I would like to stress that there is no evidence that this is working. I think Europe and Japan, who are the pioneers of these sorts of policies, they are hardly the role models India should be looking forward to for generating high growth. I think the only country where quantitative easing seems to have worked out, at least in the sense of having been coincident with good growth recovery, is United States. But this is a country which also adopted very tough recapitalization of its banking sector, very tough stress tests, and so on, and which have come to stand the test of time, given the COVID shock that has just been witnessed right now. Whether the central bank in India should be experimenting with this or not, let me just pose a few thoughts for them here. That many countries embarked on quantitative easing because they had hit the zero lower bound. Why had they hit the zero lower bound? Because they had actually entered recessionary phases, when in many cases even deflationary phases. That is not the situation where India is. India's inflation over the last 2 quarters has averaged, I think, above 6%. That is past the upper band of the mandate set for the Monetary Policy Committee. And therefore, the interest rates in India are not at zero lower bound. So if the objective is to push growth, the first lever has that you have to convince the MPC or that framework to accept that we are happy to accept higher inflation and lower the interest rates. Now, presumably, they are not doing that beyond the levels where the interest rates are right now, is because I think the inflation is not actually allowing them the space to undertake these decisions. Then to bypass that altogether and simply start managing the yield curve directly, at a minimum, I think it reflects inconsistency in my view. Now, you might say this is a way of creating transmission to the monetary policy to the real sector. As I've argued, the transmission happens first and foremost to the government bond yields, and you only encourage fiscal dominance of a greater amount when you do that. And ultimately, you have to ask the question, why is my financial sector not transmitting my monetary policy impulses? I think the number one factor in India is because their balance sheets are not as healthy or as well capitalized as they should be. So I can understand if you want to use these as temporary tools, but you have to diagnose why the transmission is not working. Ultimately, the central bank can't do all the functions of the financial sector of the economy. Some functions have to be left to the decentralized markets. And the way to get decentralized markets for transmission to work well is to get the banking sector, banks, NBFCs, and others to be recapitalized well. How can we do that? I think it's a great time right now to recapitalize, given the buoyancy of equity flows, both externally as well as internally. I think RBI can do a stress test. RBI's financial stability unit produces excellent financial stability reports every 6 months. They have been prescient about many of the upcoming problems. And I think one should put some weight on the forecasts that they have provided for where the NPAs might end up if we don't get a healthy recovery out of the COVID shock that we have witnessed. I think rather than being too unconventional, why not first try what is conventional and traditional, which is to have a healthy banking system to grow well in the long run? I think it is as simple as that. Why are we not able to achieve this? I think it comes back to fiscal dominance. Therefore, I want there to be a public debate about whether India's fisc, whether its fiscal institutions are in the right place. Do we need an independent fiscal council that ensures transparency of accounts of the fisc, of adherence to the FRBM targets, of ensuring that the disinvestments take place when they have been budgeted at the beginning of the year, and not just cosmetic disinvestments where you sell one public-owned enterprise to another? That's what we've been doing. We are just doing musical chairs with our public sector enterprises. I think we need a genuine, open debate with constructive dialogue as to how to give confidence on debt sustainability to external investors so that the government can undertake the fiscal expenditures that are going to be necessary to deal with the slowdown that the COVID has inflicted upon us.
Allows me to throw one last question at you, Dr. Acharya. Then, a lot of people have said that this is the time to put that independent fiscal council or some sort of structure in place, because many believe it's inevitable that the government will have to ask the RBI to even directly monetize debt via OMOs is par for course almost. Firstly, your view on whether it is inevitable, and if one does need to go in that direction, does it need to come with that institutional change? This might be the moment to push it through.
Absolutely. I again go back to the external sector issue. Listen, India gets into trouble when the fiscal deficit is not right, or the current account deficit is not right, or both. So whether RBI monetizes it or not, ultimately because RBI monetizing, as has been explained by many people, ultimately on a consolidated government balance sheet, this is actually government debt. RBI has to ultimately suck out the excess liquidity. We are already in a system of surplus liquidity. We have already monetized portions of government debt over the last 2 years. RBI is actually paying a cost every night to actually mop up that liquidity back onto its balance sheet from the system. It may not be paying the market rate because it has kept the reverse repo rate very, very low. Nevertheless, it is in the end a cost, because this reduces the surplus that the RBI is going to pay the government at the end of the day. So once you take a consolidated view, we are just moving debt from one balance sheet to the other, even though on the consolidated government balance sheet, what should matter is the total debt that you have out there. So ultimately, the question we have to ask is, if we have to get to higher numbers, suppose the growth doesn't recover, it is not at the levels we want. Suppose the lack of financial strength overall in the intermediation sector prevents us from achieving what we think is or what many think is the potential output rate. Will the debt to GDP numbers rise? Will they reach 85%? Will they reach 90% over the next 3 to 5 years? What are some institutional mechanisms that you can build right now? Just the way we build inflation credibility framework after the taper tantrum, to give credibility to external investors that, listen, no, we will actually keep inflation in check. The same way, now is the time to give external investors the confidence that we will keep our fiscal numbers in check. We will get onto a path of consolidation, reorientation of expenditures, and do whatever divestments are required on a fast pace if required. And I think it's better to do it before the sudden stop occurs. It's better to do it in anticipation. It's better to visualize what the stress scenario might look like. And if it's not pleasant, I think it's better to manage that risk. I'm not in the camp which says that, we have to ignore inflation, we have to ignore the fiscal deficit numbers right now. All that we have to do right now is spend, because otherwise the growth will collapse. No, spend because you need to support growth, but anticipate the risks and put in place the structures that will give confidence to investors that when and if those bad scenarios arise, you are actually adequately structurally in the right position to guard against it. I always give this analogy that as a central banker, I always wanted to play like Rahul Dravid, which is like, be stable, be the sheet anchor of the entire economy. Don't go for harakiri, because that's not the way you play a test match. And I think that's really the message I would like to send to all my dear friends at RBI.